we've seen this movement towards World Tour teams having their own dedicated kitchen, and even
not everybody has a dining area. Everybody has a chef, for sure. When I started back in 2011, and people were like, are you crazy? 2 chefs? It's insane. Fast forward to today where Jumbo-Visma has 8 chefs, 8 team chefs. I mean, they have armies.
The reality is most club riders are carrying 5 and 10 kilograms of extra weight. So it's like, what are the club guys doing wrong? Are they...
For many years, it's been, for pro athletes, a lot about also starving yourself. I mean, there's been a lot of issues with, because you get such a crazy relationship, but there's a fine line between being lean versus having enough energy to ride. They're like, how can I fine-tune my performance? The first thing I ask them about is, what is your alcohol intake like? You want to fine-tune everything. Alcohol is the first thing that needs to go. When I talk to retired riders, I always ask them, what would your advice be to amateur riders? And I get the same answer from all the pros. And
Hannah, welcome to the Roadman Cycling Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining me. Hannah, there's so much conflicting and confusing information in the realm of sports science and food in general. Like, how do you stay up to date on the latest research and know what to pay attention to and kind of filter out the pseudoscience, the bro science, the misinformation?
Oh my God. Well, where do I start? So first of all, I have my very good friend and business partner as well, Dr. Stacy Sims. She's sort of like my go-to if I'm really in a doubt. If I can't, decipher the sources where they're from, she's my go-to source. It's Stacy, is this, what do you think about this? So then we have a chat about, Stacy is a human sports physiologist that specializes in gender differences and anything endurance performance. So she's a really good backup in terms of, if I'm in a doubt. But mostly, obviously, I mean, I'm really focused on the sources of the material. There's lots of fads and crazy diets going around, and I think it's pretty easy to see whether something is just a quick fix or it's not. It's sort of like that way. I think, I mean, honestly, when you look at what's around, if it becomes a fad and people sort of like think it's a quick fix, typically it's something you need to look into. Is this something that is, sustainable over long term? So that's sort of like, the go-to thing.
The line between sports science and nutrition, it's an increasingly blurred line. Like if we look at something that's quite topical at the moment, like ketones, you can get into ketosis through exogenous ketones, or we can get into ketosis with dietary restrictions. So when you look at something like that, where does the guidance come from if you're working? Is it leaning on someone like Stacy, or is it led from teams if you're working in team, or is it you leading the charge and saying, hey, this is the direction we need to go?
Okay, so I mean, it's sort of like split in different, in compartments, I would say. So first of all, obviously, I was very curious about the whole ketone movement, I would say. So I've had the privilege of having done a lot of interviews and chats with different pro riders and different nutritionists from the major teams like Team Jumbo-Visma and Team UAE. And the interesting thing is, I would say almost as many different people as you have on these teams, there's different opinions, even different expert opinions on whether this is something that actually helps you or not. So for me, I think it's a balance of, having the conversation about ketones, whether does this actually work? Is there evidence for this boosting performance and helping you? I think with in my opinion, the answers I got was not really, but people tend to think that it's better to, try it, but because what if? That's sort of like the feedback that I get. So, I mean, just to take it sort of like down a notch, how I see nutrition and how I see food and fuel for athletes is more, I take it down to the basics. There's a big difference being an endurance athlete, a pro elite endurance athlete, and then being, leisure time, heart-loving amateur, serious about cycling. But this is not your bread and butter. And what I think is that most people tend to take it a notch too high if they're not top pro athletes. So fueling with real food, is sufficient and is more than enough if you're not riding the Tour de France. And just to be honest, very few of us get to actually ride the Tour de France. So I think it's sort of like a fine balance. A lot of the pro riders that I've been talking to also about the ketones, I like to ask them this question because it's sort of like a thing where some are religious towards it and some are, I don't feel anything. But that's because there's a lot of also the belief, obviously the placebo effect, because if you don't have any sort of proven data on it, even on your own, data tracks, then but what if it works, right? You don't know that way. So it's sort of like, for me, I hate the word preach, but I'd like to tell people, start with the basics. Start with proper, good nutrition, real food, and, see how far you can take it with that before you go into
it's a brilliant point, because people kind of major in the minors. Like, by that, I mean they spend disordinate amount of time focusing on, the 1% benefit that maybe being in ketosis could bring them. But this is not somebody who, if you look at their entire life, merits that 1% deep dive.
Right.
If you're drinking a few beers on the weekend, which there's no problem with drinking a few beers on the weekend, but just World Tour guys aren't doing that. Like, they're digging for that 1%. You normally have much easier gains to make in other areas of your life.
It's interesting you say that, because one of the things I always say to people when they're like, how can I fine tune my performance? The first thing I ask them about is, what is your alcohol intake like? Because honestly, if you, you can drink beers on the weekend, of course, and celebrate, have a glass of wine and so on. But if you really want to make it, if you want to fine tune everything, alcohol is the first thing that needs to go before you start thinking about ketones and everything, right? And another interesting thing was, I had a talk with actually my old boss, Bjarne Ries, who used to own the cycling team that I work with. And when I talk to retired riders, I always ask them, what would your advice be to, amateur riders and leisure, serious non-pro riders? And I get the same answer from all the pros, and that is chill out. They say, when they see these guys being so strict that it almost ruins marriages in terms of diet plan, strict exercise regimes and so on, when you are not a pro, it's crazy. It end up becoming, an obsession that just ruins the whole fun part of cycling. So I think, that advice is, it has to be fun. Of course, it has to be serious, but, you don't want to let it ruin your social life and your family life because you have to become number 8 in the La Marmotte race. You know what I mean? Or number 25. I think it's a fine balance.
Advice, but it really rings true.
Yeah.
I raced and I tried to do up the levels for quite a few years, and raced full time in France, moved out to the States chasing contracts. Then I hit a point where I was at a ceiling where I was like, okay, this isn't for me, and I took some years out of cycling, and I'm back this year for the first time, and I'm still Cat 1, I still have ambitions to win races, but with a totally different attitude. If it's raining, I'm not registering for races that are on Saturday until Friday till I see the weather forecast. I'm racing in sleet. I'm not racing in rain. This is meant to be fun. I'm at cinema if it's raining. I'm having beers on the weekend. I'm not taking it too serious. If I wake up and I feel like going riding my mountain bike instead of going racing on the road, that's when I'm going to go ride my mountain bike with my girlfriend and have a laugh. And people are always like, what's your calendar for this year? I'm like, I don't have a calendar for this year. I'm like, tomorrow. It's a totally different attitude, but it could bring great performance gains.
I mean, I think also there is actually studies that support, the truth of, if you are stressed out, if you are very focused on calorie intake and like minimal, marginal gains, and like being so focused on a strict exercise regime and diet plans next to your full-time job, the stress that you get from having a crazy full-time job and being quote unquote a full-time almost pro rider, actually is not beneficial to your performance. So having a life where, you race for fun, you're not a pro rider, you're not in the tour, but as I typically say, when you look at your age and you're like, can I still be a pro rider? If you're plus 30, chances are, if you haven't been a pro rider, you probably won't be. So it's the fine, it's the fine balance. And I'm not saying don't take it seriously, but I'm just saying, there's a fine line between being so serious that you break up your relationship to your friends and your family, and then being serious where it's also fun and you integrate it in your life, that the food you eat, your family can eat too. Cycling is also supposed to be a thing that can be a mental break for a lot of people, good exercise, and then also fun. I think that is the thing. It's really, you get the furthest that way. It'll be long lasting for sure.
Do you think the cultural attitudes and perceptions around food and nutrition have changed during your time in the sport?
Yes, absolutely. It's been interesting to follow looking back from like, what are we, 2023 now? I'm like, wow, already. The past 10, 15 years it's been a huge change. We've gone through, I think in the early 10s, it was very much the low carb focus, and trying to push performance that way. But I think what we look at now is there's a lot more data coming into the whole nutrition part. And when you base actual nutrition guidelines on real data, like a lot of the major teams like Team Jumbo-Visma, they are, superior in terms of tracking what works and what gets in. It's for many years, it's been for pro athletes a lot about also starving yourself. There's been a lot of issues with, even eating disorders, because you get such a crazy relationship, the food and your body weight, being lean, being able to perform. But there's a fine line between being lean and cutting food versus having enough energy to ride. So when you base your nutrition guidelines on what you actually need, it turns out as you eat, you have to eat a lot more than you actually think you have to eat. And what I see now and what I hear from all the pro riders is they eat so much more on the bike now than they did 5 years, 10 years ago, because they realize, well, when you're on the bike, that is when you need all that energy. They're depending on the rider, depending on their stomach, depending on their physiology, how big they are, and muscle mass and so on. They take in between 60 to 120 grams of carbs, per hour. It's great. It is so much food on the bike. So things has changed a lot, because if you keep on fueling, if you keep on, I think everybody who's been on a bike, who's tried bonking, hitting the wall, no more running on a flat, basically, they know that if you forget to eat, you're done, right? You're just done. So keeping it up all the time is so important. And I think the teams have seen that this is the way to go. It's not, you don't try to lose weight when you're on the bike. That's outrageous, right? That is where you have to eat and you have to get the fuel. So the teams are eating so much. So things have changed also in terms of, yes, it has.
That's been a big shift, because I spoke to Christian Van der Velde a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about the Armstrong days, US Postal. He said they would routinely go out for 5, 6, 7 hour rides, basically with the goal of basically with the goal of being glycogen depleted coming home. He said he'd stumble home and hardly be able to walk up the stairs in his house. Difficult to get out for training the next day because he was so glycogen depleted. But they just thought that was normal, that you had to feel that.
And they also, I know from a lot of the older riders I've talked to, is they thought that they could train it. They thought they could push the limits of running on basically pure body fat for longer by testing it. And it's when you look at it with our eyes and the knowledge we have today, it is absolutely outrageous to think about. I mean, riding 5 hours with barely any food. I mean, you're ruining your recovery. You're ruining days of performance. I mean, that is crazy. And I think the worst thing you can do in cycling is to get a relationship with food and nutrition where it becomes, either a punishment where you have to you punish yourself. Oh, I wasn't very good today. I need to cut something. I need to lose weight. It's the really, really bad spiral. So having a good, healthy relationship with food, being allowed to eat, being, it's a fine balance, of course, because some riders are gifted with a metabolism that everybody would die for, right? They can eat whatever they want, whenever they want, and just be lean and that never have a problem. And then you look at their colleague next to them and they are struggling, right? They have to weigh everything and measure everything. And that is a tough life. But you really, I think as a rider, you have to constantly think about, you can't live, it's unsustainable living the life where you punish yourself and you starve yourself. Every single day for your entire career. It has to be a fine balance. And you are the sum of what you do the most. So if you have a good and healthy relationship with food and you eat, varied throughout your season, and once in a while you also gift yourself, that's not going to break the bank, right? And this goes for, amateurs as well.
But it's like cycling occupies these two different worlds, though, because you say on the one hand that World Tour cyclists, they're not eating enough. This has been a historic problem for not just the last decade, but longer with cycling and its relationship with eating disorders. And I've had Yanni Brakovic, on the podcast breaking down and heartbreakingly talking about making himself sick at the top of Alpe d'Huez after winning the stage of Criterium de Dauphiné. Beats Contador a 2-up going up to Criterium Dauphiné Queen stage in Alpe d'Huez, and then makes himself sick in the hotel because he has bulimia. Obviously, we don't want that, but also I look at just, a cursory observation of most clubs that you see on a Saturday, Sunday. And the reality is most club riders are carrying between 5 and 10 kilograms of extra weight. So it's like, what are the club guys doing wrong? Are they fueling too much? Is it the wrong types of fuel? Or I suppose what I'm trying to get at here is, what would your advice be for that club rider who is trying to shed maybe 5 kilograms of weight?
Back to what I said before, the alcohol is the first place you look, definitely. The second thing is, it's really important to, understand what's your training plan look like? How many hours are you riding? Because you should be able to, from when you get up and you've had a small breakfast, you should be able to ride easily an hour and a half, 2 hours without having to pump gels and bars and everything from the very first second, and there's also a difference between whether it's an easy ride or you're testing intervals and so on. And I think a lot of club riders tend to think that from the second they get on the bike, they pump a gel because they see that's what the pros do. And so because you as a club rider, you probably don't ride, 6 days a week, 5 hours a day. The energy consumption, the energy that you take in around your riding has to be balanced. And I think that's it's sort of like you got to look at the overall picture. And then definitely the next thing is also looking at your overall general diet. What do you eat on a daily basis? If your lunch pack is a pack of crisps and a sandwich with white toast bread and a tiny slice of ham, the chances are once you've eaten it, you've had a pretty big caloric intake, but you're not full for very long because you don't have enough protein. It's a tiny, tiny bit of protein. And I think that is also what I see, even in the pro riders. A lot of the pro riders, they don't take in enough protein. And what happens then is obviously all the amazing training and riding you do, you break down your muscle tissues, you have to rebuild it again. In order to rebuild it, you need to eat protein. If you don't get enough protein in, your muscles are never going to, repair themselves and grow. And then again, the bigger your muscles grow, the higher your metabolism is. So that's sort of like that goes along the same way. So if you don't eat enough protein, you're constantly fighting your own system because the body's going to need the protein. And where does it take it from? It takes it from its own resources, the muscles, which is counter to what you want to do. So, and then protein has the ability of keeping you full. So when you eat protein, it takes longer to break down, so you're full for longer. So if you look at what you eat on your plate and you have barely any protein, you have a ton of like super duper fast absorbable carbs. If everything's white on the plate, right? You might want to look into sort of like swapping things so that the fuel you eat on a daily basis is going to last you longer. So you don't, especially with your blood sugar, so you keep it stable during the day. Because again, back to the lunch with a pack of crisps and a little sandwich, you eat it, maybe an hour and a half later, you're like peckish, right? You're hungry. And then you go, rummaging, and then, there's a bar or there's a snack. And then even though you think you're eating healthy snacks, almonds, whatever, they're high caloric as well. But you don't see it as a meal, and then you tend to fall into the snack sort of like hole. And then you start eating that. You get way too many calories again, instead of having a proper meal with, a good balanced macros, good amount of protein, so that you're full and you don't feel like, snacking random things. Or even if you have a hunger flat, just, sitting at the office or at work and you're like, oh my God, what's there? And there's cake or whatever, you're going to eat it. And I think a lot of people don't notice how much extra stuff they eat during the day that is not a part of their sort of like main diet. So that was the longest answer ever. But
I did an advocate of meal prep, advanced planning.
Yeah, I love meal prep. So I feel like I should probably have been 20 years older to be at the peak time of food processors. I am such a huge fan of food processors because they slice and they dice, and that is heaven for meal prep. Basically, yes, I love it. I think it's such a good idea to, like Sunday afternoon, cook up chicken, make some nice salads and rice and quinoa and, relentless self-promotion. I've made a ton of cookbooks with great salads and easy meal preps to do. But the good thing is when you do meal prep, you can pack for like 4-5 days in the fridge, and you're going to have a nutritious, tasty, delicious meal that's going to keep you out of that danger zone of like falling into like, ooh, snacks, ooh, cake, hunger flats. So yeah, meal prep, absolutely for the win. Love it. And food processors, because they help you.
When you're sitting back and you're planning your meals for the week and you're looking to balance your individual goals, like sticking with the athlete who is trying to lose 5 kilograms and is maybe riding his bike 10 hours a week, how do you balance those individual goals into your meal prep plan?
I think the overall thing is obviously depending. If you meal prep for yourself, it's a lot easier than if you have to meal prep for the whole family. Losing weight is just to put it out there, and losing weight is not something that you should do fast. Losing weight is something that you should do over a longer period of time, because if you do that, chances are that you're going to keep the weight off for longer. They're a lot bigger. So in terms of meal prep, I think my general rule is back to the protein. As a general rule, try to get 25 to 30 grams of protein in each meal, because if you're riding, even if you're not riding, the protein is just such a helping hand for keeping you full. And then, of course, the carbohydrates in your meal prep is the basics of how active are you. If you train 3 times a week, and the last 4 days are very sedative, you're sitting, maybe working at an office or something, you obviously have to adjust for that. So I think that's sort of like the first part where you have to like fine tune. What am I doing? Am I riding later on? Have I been on the bike this morning? What does your day look like? Does that make sense? Sort of like tone it up and down, but keep it the same. So basically, you just dial the macros in on each portion. And then, of course, the fats, that is also a place where you really want to be careful that you're not just slushing it with dressing and so on. You definitely need the fats. Make sure that you get them from the good sources that keeps your nerve system and your brain functions intact. So like good fish and stuff like that, nice cold pressed oils.
Your philosophy seems to be very much centered around whole foods, unprocessed ingredients. Is this an approach that benefits athletes and non-athletes alike, or is there a more, is there a tipping point where you're like, if somebody's trying to prioritize convenience, they can move away from whole foods?
I mean, nowadays, convenience, luckily, most supermarkets, they provide sliced and diced veggies, pre-cooked quinoa. I mean, it is very, very, even ready-mixed stuff, it is very, very easy to pick whole foods that is sort of combined for you. So where you got to be, I think when I talk about processed foods, it's more, it's sort of like ready-made sausages and hamburger patties and things that, if you look at the ingredient list and you have no idea what else is, like, it looks like a burger, but it has 200 ingredients, chances are it's extremely processed, right? So if you look at a salad and it says quinoa, carrot, whatever, orange, whatever you have in it, if you understand the ingredients, because of course there's some processing to things, you got to bake a chicken if it's ready made, but it's a fine line. And every time you're hungry and you don't have time to prep, you have a choice. Even if you go into, let's say, like a corner store and you're hungry, what are the options? Do you take the quesadilla, or do you take the nice sort of like salad or sandwich with protein in it? You have the options at every meal to sort of like choose what you want. And I understand that it is difficult for some people. I know when I travel a lot, especially if you travel by air, it can be extremely difficult to find food that is not totally overprocessed in the airports, on gas stations, and so on. So my advice is definitely there. Pack whatever you can pack from home with little energy bars, like nuts and stuff like that will give you, more than just cake-like bread and sugar-pumped meat and dressings. So I'm not, obviously I'm a chef, so I say, yes, you got to make stuff yourself, but I also understand that if you can pick the easy route and buy stuff that's already shredded, buy stuff that's already cooked, look at the sugar content. I think that's the most important thing. Look at how much sugar is in the stuff, because a lot of people don't think about when they pick up, it's even if it's like a drink, meats, cold cuts, anything, bread, dressings, the amount of sugar that they put into this stuff without you knowing is crazy. So I think that's where you got to look at it. If you have to pick the processed stuff, look at the sugar content and try and find what is closest to the whole foods department, if that makes sense.
If anyone hasn't seen your Amazon Prime documentary, Eat, Race, Win, it's absolutely brilliant. It's such a brilliant piece of cycling TV, and I'm so happy that Amazon got behind. But
thank you.
Looking back now with the benefit of hindsight on that documentary, what do you hope the viewers took from that?
I mean, my hope is obviously, my hope is that they understand that food is not just fuel. Food has much, bigger part of performance, because you have to see, look at it as a whole, like a holistic picture. Food has the ability to, motivate you and boost the morale, as you say in cycling, right? Food can be comforting. Food has a sort of like an ability to connect people around it. So even though, let's say, the tour team, they've had a rough day on the bike, right? Things didn't go as planned. Sitting down at that meal, having a nutritious, delicious, visibly beautiful meal, is one thing. They get what they like, sort of like their physical needs, but also it creates the space where the family sort of like solves their problems. And I think that is something food can do that a lot of other things can't do. This is like, especially for pro riders, the only time where they sit down and sort of like, the warriors, they've put down their weapons and they can sit over a meal, and regardless of, nationality or backgrounds or whatever, they all share the same meal and they can talk about things. And this is where you sort of like fix the problems, you have a laugh. And I think this is something that food can also do. And I think it's so important to remember that that is a big, big part of it as well. Especially, if you're a rider and you've had such a bad day on your bike and maybe you've crashed or you're almost dropped and it's just really bad, you know that at the end of the day, there's going to be a great meal. And it's sort of like a make or break, right? So I think that's what food can do too. So it's got many great aspects to it.
We've seen this movement towards World Tour teams having their own dedicated kitchen and even dining areas, which they're bringing with them to races in the last few years. How common is that? Is every team doing it? I know I've seen Ineos, Jumbo, I've seen the Green Edge or whatever they call themselves these days, Alu, Jekyll, and themselves. I've seen those teams doing it, but is it everyone?
Not everybody has a dining area. Everybody has a chef, for sure. When I started back in 2011, not everybody had a chef. And some teams only had a chef to make sure that the food was safe to eat, healthy, that there was enough, and that it was on time. Those were the basics, right? Nowadays, we were the first team on my team where we were 2 chefs. I had an apprentice, and people were like, "Are you crazy? 2 chefs? It's insane." Fast forward to today where Jumbo-Visma has 8 chefs, 8 team chefs. They have armies of chefs, right? So now it's changed a lot. I know there's one thing in cycling that it's the unwritten rules, sort of like that. When you have a team, it's very important to keep the team together. You have to. You have a lot of people when you're at a race. At the Tour de France, you have sometimes 30 people, staff and riders and everything, huge groups of people. So I know a lot of the teams have the philosophy that they don't want to separate the riders from the rest of the staff, because if they separate them, it becomes sort of like them against us, the staff against the riders, or you don't have that feeling, even though we never eat at the same time, because the riders always eat first because the staff has to finish, fixing the bikes and the massages and so on. Sitting in the same room in the hotel, bringing the food in, sitting in the same sort of like dining area, you still have that connection, which is important. And back to what I said before, sitting at the dinner table, having a talk where you're outside of racing. This is important. And this is also where the riders, they're calm. They're not just off the bike either being happy or angry or tired or, whatever. Everybody is sort of like, you connect. And so I know that's why some of the teams don't want to put the riders in a separate little van somewhere, because if you take them out and plop them in the little van, it becomes a part that, you can't be a part of, and and this is quote unquote breaks the family in that way. On the other hand, of course, if you do have a dining room, it's a lot easier for the riders. Everything is there, so on. It's just, you can control exactly what they eat, right? They can't sneak up to the hotel buffet and snatch a little croissant or a dessert or some fries, right? It is, they get what they have in the dining room. But I think there's pros and cons to it, because some hotels, and just to really say this, as a pro rider, you don't live in 5-star hotels at all. It is some scruffy looking hotels sometimes, I promise you that. So of course, it's nice when, I've even had to sit up tables in the foyer of the hotel because they didn't have room for us. So it's that on days like those, you definitely want to have your own space, right? But there is a familiar connection, and there is something that is extremely important for for the teams that they connect, rider and staff. It's sort of like restaurants, front of house, back of house. If they function together, you have a well-oiled machine. So my opinion, and also knowing from
Where do you think it's going next? I was chatting to a friend recently on a different niche. We were talking about indoor cycling, and that's just been I don't think any of us anticipated the directions indoor cycling was going to go, and the acceleration of indoor cycling with the pandemic from Zwift to, your purpose-built trainers like Wattbike. Just, it's so different when I started than the creaky old turbo trainer in the shed looking at the wall. So virtual reality, augmented reality in the next 10 years, they look like they're going to play such a role in that space. Yeah. If you look at nutrition over the next 10 years, what directions do you think that's going to move?
I mean, I think it's interesting because already now the technology is there to measure live blood sugar, right? If you've heard of Super Sapiens, which is sort of like a little tap, like a thing you can put on, and you can measure your blood sugar basically almost live and see it on your phone. You're not allowed to do that in races on road racing. But I think when you're looking at all these online sort of like Swift-like universes, this is a thing where you actually can have a view into what does your body actually need in the moment, and get a lot wiser and smarter on how things work. I want to say things, how your body works and what it needs. And then based on that, of course, especially when you're indoors, it's a lot easier because if you have riders sitting on home trainers, you can provide them whatever they need, right? It's basically so easy to provide them what they need right there. I mean, honestly, I had a crazy talk with the nutritionist from Team Jumbo-Visma, and we were chatting back and forth about this specific. So I had a conversation with Karin, who is the sort of main nutritionist and performance chef. She's in charge of all the chefs of the team. And they developed an app where they, basically track all the meals of the riders. I mean, and they track the meals of the riders, track what they're doing, like on training, on their rides, in races, and an algorithm, AI, fine-tunes to each rider exactly what they need at the next meal in terms of macros and so on. It is crazy. And once you have all of this info, the next step, basically you can print food. There is the option of printing food, right? So you can just, it becomes almost sci-fi in my ears, because if you know exactly what you need in the macros, in the vitamins and the minerals, and you can print food, you can design the bar or sludge or drink with exactly the stuff that you need. And I want to say, do I think it's the future? I hope not, because that would it would sort of take the, the passion, and there is life and happiness to food and flavor. And I think it would be sad to go so close to performance peak training that people become robots. And luckily also I know that because riders are humans, it's not going to be a long lasting thing. I can't fast forward 10 years where everybody's got the printed food.
You can separate them. Like if you look at indoor cycling, you can get all the benefits physiologically indoor cycling that you can get outdoor cycling, but you can't separate us from our primal nature. We're humans. Right. We need social connection. That has a role that's maybe difficult to measure with data points to show exactly what that role is and how powerful it is. But we know the World Health Organization has anticipated in the next 10 years, the leading cause of death globally is going to be loneliness. Yeah. And stuff that flows from that, suicide, etc. So social connection is an antidote to loneliness. But when you look at food and the idea of printing off, like as you say, a juice or a sludge that has all the macro and micronutrients you need, it separates it from the idea of social connection, of us as a tribal sort of family who used to gather around a campfire and share stories over mealtime.
Exactly.
That still has an importance, even though it's difficult to quantify.
It does. And I think, I think in my experience, you always have the theoretical perfect scenario, right? In the perfect world, if everybody did like this, A, B, C, followed this, did this, ate this, they would be perfect. They would, they would just ride at their best. But you have the human mind, you have emotions, you have conflicts, and that just affects if you feel like it, if you don't feel like it, if you're frustrated. I mean, and that will be impossible to take out of people. Because that is just the nature of the game. So, I mean, I don't think we're going to not see all of this Swift indoor cycling. It's not going to go away, but hopefully there's going to be communities around it where you still compete as you do, but you connect it, you gather. Because obviously if you have indoor cycling events, you have a big dinner afterwards, right? You could have that social part of it at the same time. And I think people are going to naturally want to do that and go in that direction, because I mean, honestly, as you say, it's loneliness equals death, honestly.
And I've all your old books on my bookshelf, so I'm excited for May 30th for the new Grand Tour Cookbook to be released.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting. It's 10-year anniversary since the first one came out in Danish. So that's also a big thing. Can't believe it's been 10 years. We have brand new writers in, great interviews with the nutritionists, easy to do recipes, and it's going to come out in English, Danish, German. In May. We're doing like you can pre-order it. I'll give you guys a little code if you wanna get your order in. Now it's going to be great. 350 pages of absolutely amazing, beautiful, super performance food for everyone. Easy to do.
Yeah, if you fire me across the code, I will add this to our mailing list for anyone.
I will.
Podcast is on our mailing list, and you can get a little bit of a discount off Hannah's book. And it's been amazing chatting food, nutrition, social connection, a world tour, and just all things deliciousness, because I'm kind of salivating as this. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having me. It's been great.